This equipment gives you a huge amount of value, but it also creates a problem. When you use Rocket Backpack, you're committing your Duke and your Queen very early, and most of the time, they're completely exposed. And this is where most players lose the attack. They get a strong entry, but they don't protect it. Because once you create that kind of value, you need to follow up immediately. And that's the key idea. It's not just about Rocket Backpack, and it's not just about fast execution. It's how both work together. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to turn that early value into a winning attack. Today I'm going to show you a composition that I've been using in High Legends, and with it I've been getting a very consistent triple rate, so I'll explain the logic behind it while showing some of my attacks. This is the standard composition I'm using. Rocket Backpack with Giant Arrow, and Earthquakes to remove key defenses. I also use Phoenix on the Duke, Raven on the Minion Prince, and I like bringing a Lava Hound as well, because on most bases the Lava Hound can absorb a lot of air traps, and also the pups deal with the skeletons. Now let's check the first replay. This is a standard anti-air base with Rage and Poison, so the first question is, which buildings matter the most with this composition? The number one priority is always the clan castle. If you can remove the clan castle, the attack becomes much easier, because most of the time it contains Furnace plus Headhunters, and that combination is very strong against the Duke and against this style of attack in general. After that, Revenge Tower is another major target because it is also extremely strong against your push. Then comes the Monolith, especially for the Duke path. If the Duke gets close to the Monolith, he can die very quickly. So in general, your priorities are Clan Castle, Revenge Tower, Monolith. If spell towers are available, you usually don't need earthquakes for them. The combination of Rocket Backpack plus Giant Arrow is enough to remove them. That means you can save your earthquakes for the more important targets. A lot of the time, you'll also hit the Lava Launcher because it's usually in the core, but that's not a priority. Lava Launcher is not as important here because most of the time, it will mainly affect the Queen, and in many cases, the Queen is already working from outside the base. Now let's move to the execution. There are basically two ways to start this attack. The first way is to open with the Giant Arrow. That makes the attack easier to execute, but in my opinion, it is not the ideal version. The problem is that if you are a little late with the Earthquakes or with the Duke entry, you may fail to remove the buildings you wanted. The execution I prefer is to start with the Earthquakes. Why? Because when you start with the Earthquakes, the builders are forced to repair surrounding buildings first. Since Earthquake affects a large area, they get busy fixing other structures and often do not immediately repair the exact building you are trying to remove, like the Clan Castle or the Revenge Tower. That is why starting with the Earthquakes is usually stronger. It is harder to execute, but it gives you a better chance to secure the key targets. And sometimes it even lets you save one Earthquake, because the builders don't repair in time. Monolith needs one Earthquake, Revenge Tower needs two, Clan Castle also needs two. I always try to place the Earthquakes in a way that hits as many buildings as possible, while also forcing the builders to waste time on less important repairs. As soon as I place the Earthquake, I immediately deploy the Duke, because I need to take those buildings down as fast as possible, before the builders have time to repair them. Right after the Duke, I place the Queen near her entry point and use the Giant Arrow. That is the sequence I prefer. Earthquake first, then Duke, then Queen plus Giant Arrow. I know some players prefer to start with the Queen, but I like starting with the Duke because it keeps the Duke closer to the Queen earlier. Since I'm using Phoenix on the Duke, this positioning helps the two parts connect faster. If I start with the Queen and only deploy the Duke later, he takes longer to get close to her. So again, this version is a little harder mechanically, but it is more effective when executed well. If you don't miss the Giant Arrow, this attack becomes much more consistent. Now in this position, I like to use the troops very quickly to protect the Queen, because there is always a risk that she dies too early. If the Queen dies, I lose a lot of value, so the Dragon Riders need to come in fast enough to tank and stabilize the push. That's why this is much more of an execution-based attack than a planning-heavy attack. It is not about a lot of deep setup. It is about being fast and precise. Correct Earthquakes, fast Duke entry, accurate Giant Arrow, quick troop deployment to protect the heroes. Now the next question is, which side should you send the main army from? Usually you want to deploy on the opposite side of the Duke. The idea is simple. The Duke clears one side by himself, and the Dragon Riders clear the other. You usually do not have much time to wait and see exactly where the Duke will go, so most of the time you need to make a fast read. You look at his initial angle, decide whether he is likely to move left or right, and then deploy the main army on the opposite side. In this replay, I wait just a moment, see that the Duke is moving more to the right side, and then I deploy the army from the left. I start with the Lava Hound to absorb traps, But in this specific position, I actually think Dragon Riders first would have been better. There wasn't much air damage in front of me, so the Hound moved too far ahead and started tanking too early. A cleaner execution here would have been Dragon Riders first, wait a bit, then Lava Hound that would create better synchronization. And as I always say in my videos, synchronization matters. If the air defense is too far from your entry, the Hound can drift too far ahead and tank for no reason. In that case, the Dragon Riders should come first so the push stays connected. Still, because this attack has to be played fast, I often prioritize immediate execution over perfect planning. I only have 30 seconds to read the base, so I would rather execute quickly than overthink and lose value while the Duke is already taking damage. So I deploy the Dragon Riders, then the Siege Barracks on the side to funnel. That gives me Dragon Riders for the main push, Siege Barracks for the side funnel, Queen protected behind the entry. Sometimes the Queen dies, but when that happens, it is often because of ground X-bows. If the X-bows are on ground mode, they don't hit the Dragon Riders, which means the Riders can clean more easily. So there is a trade-off. Ground X-bows are worse for the Queen, Air X-bows are worse for the Dragon Riders. I use super balloons to remove key defenses and support the main push. In this replay, my overgrowth was not ideal. It should have been placed a little more to the right so I could also catch the sweeper. The idea was correct. Reduce the pressure and improve pathing, but the placement could have been cleaner. Still, the important part is that I removed the side damage and kept the Dragon Riders moving in a line. I didn't break their line. I simply reduced the side damage so their pathing became more direct. The Duke is still working at the bottom with the Phoenix. And now comes a very important detail, the revive timing. I do not want to revive the Duke too early. If I revive him immediately, he can simply die again for no reason. I need to wait until the main army gets closer so it can tank some of the pressure, especially from defenses like the Monolith. Only then do I revive the Duke. That creates proper synchronization between both sides. Main army coming from the top, Duke reconnecting from the bottom, pressure split between the two sides. That is the ideal moment to use the revive. Once that happens, the base is basically finished and the rest is cleanup. So this first example shows the core idea of the strategy. This is a very execution-heavy attack. It does not require a huge amount of planning, but it requires speed, precision, and good timing. If you are good at this type of execution, this attack will be very strong for you. Now let's look at another base. Here the player positioned the buildings in a way that makes the giant arrow line less direct. It is harder to get everything in a straight line, so this is the kind of adaptation that I think we will see more often in the future. In this case, instead of using the giant arrow in a straight line, you use it more diagonally and accept that you may not get every target. So again, the priorities stay the same. Clan Castle first, Revenge Tower second, Monolith if possible. In this replay, I didn't get every building I wanted. I didn't take the Monolith, for example. But even then, the giant arrow still removed 2 air defenses and a big section of the base. That is why this attack is so strong right now. Even when you miss one ideal target, the giant arrow still gets value because it removes other important defenses like sweepers, air defenses, and support structures. From there, the logic is the same. I see the Duke going up, so I already send the Dragon Riders from the bottom. In this case, I don't have amazing funneling because I didn't fully break the defensive ring, but it is still better to deploy quickly and protect the Queen and the Duke than to wait for perfect pathing. That's another key point of this strategy. Sometimes speed is more important than perfect shape. This is why I call it a brute force attack. If the entry already got massive value, you often don't need beautiful pathing. You just overwhelm the base before it can punish you. So I deploy fast, protect the heroes, use the siege barracks to help the side funnel, then use the ability near the rage tower and place the overgrowth in a strong area that also catches the sweeper. And now you can clearly see in this attack that even though I lose a bit of value on the Dragon Riders by deploying them quickly without perfect pathing, the fact that I enter so fast gives me a lot more value on the Queen. So this becomes a trade-off. I can delay the Dragon Riders and spend more time creating better funneling, but then I risk losing her value early. Or I can commit fast with the Dragon Riders, even without perfect pathing, and protect her immediately. And you can clearly see the difference here. When I go in fast, the Queen gets way more value. She stays alive for a much longer time, and that ends up being more impactful than having perfect pathing on the Dragon Riders. Now let's go to another example. Here I changed the siege barracks side because the giant arrow was harder to use from one angle, but much better from the top thanks to the wizard tower alignment. So I entered with the Duke from one side, and the queen from the other. I opened with earthquakes and duke, then used the queen from the top. In this case, there is a problem. Even though I got strong value, I did not break the ring of the base. The defensive ring is still there, so the dragon riders are more likely to split. Normally, that is not ideal. But once again, with this strategy, if your entry is strong enough, it is often better to brute force through the base than to wait for a perfect setup. However, there was one more detail here. The queen side had extremely high damage. There were 2 rage towers covering that area, so the queen alone would not be enough to clear it safely. That is why I used the siege barracks there, not just for funnel, but to help the queen survive and clear that section. That is an important adaptation. You must always identify which side is easier to funnel and which side has too much damage for the queen alone. That's why I committed early and used brute force again. It may not look like the cleanest attack visually, but it is effective. And right now, that is what matters most with this strategy. So the final rule is this. Most of the time, you do want to create pathing. But when your entry gets huge value and there is too much pressure on your heroes, it is often better to push fast and brute force through the base to protect them. That is the core of this strategy. And once you start playing like this, you'll notice something. Even when the attack is not perfect, it still works. Because you're not relying on ideal setups anymore. You're creating value in real time, and that's what makes this strategy so consistent. So if this helped you understand how to actually get value from this type of attack, you can support the channel by using code Marinol in-game. And if you want to keep improving with this kind of breakdown, make sure you're subscribed.